Yes, hello and welcome to Play On, the Scottish football show, where for the next hour we're talking all things Scottish football. I'm David Simmons, and like every week I'm joined by my esteemed colleagues Anthony Brown and Stephen Common. Stay tuned as we look back over the weekend's key talking Scottish football points, the highlights and everything else in between. On tonight's show we are discussing another Celtic defeat at the hands of Rangers. Where does Dominic McKay's rebuild begin? That's our key talking point tonight. And like every week, we're fully live and interactive. Get in touch, drop us a message and we will discuss your point. Don't forget, of course, if you're watching on YouTube, then please remember to subscribe to State of Mind YouTube channel. Get on over to Twitter and follow the Play On Scottish Football Show. Right, so Stephen, I'm going to start with you, mate. Today it was the official appointment of new Celtic CEO Dominic McKay. He's in, he's got the new comfy desk chair, he's unpacked his favourite mug and pen, conducted the Windows updates on his new PC at his desk. He's even opened his welcome Cuthbert the Caterpillar cake. He's all sorted, ready to go. But what are his priorities? As Celtic CEO, what does Dominic McKay need to have at top of that list to rebuild this club?
Oh, where do you start? It is,
at the top. What's top of the list?
That kind of probably, like in all seriousness, that probably has to be where he does actually start. I mean, I cannot fathom the fact that he has not already been involved in conversations and planning up until this point. I mean, maybe not in an official capacity, but he must have been consulted up to now, because I think Celtic, it is imperative for them now to move as quickly as possible. I mean, we've been saying this for weeks, but when you say, obviously, from the very top to the very bottom, the top being the structure of the club. I mean, they've never actually officially said that they're going to change to a director of football structure. I don't think they've ever formally come out and confirmed that, but it just seems to be that everyone has this assumption, and when I say everyone, it's not just the fans, it's the journalists, it's everyone that commentates on Scottish football. So they need to get these positions, and obviously the most important position of all, the first team manager. I think obviously up until this weekend, Celtic fans had kind of maybe not warmed to the idea of John Kennedy as a manager, but they'd kind of maybe warmed to the idea of maybe just having him in there. And given the fact that they beat Livingston so convincingly last weekend, they probably thought, oh, well, he could potentially get a tune out of these guys. But another Old Firm game, and it's exactly the same scenario as we faced before. Celtic had a lot of the ball, they had chances, but Rangers just killed them off. When the chances came for Rangers, they took them. And it seems to me that people were maybe giving Celtic a bit of an easy ride last week because they were playing in a no-pressure game against Livingston. I mean, all respect to Livingston, but Celtic should be dominating a game against Livingston. There was no pressure on the players. There's no fans in the ground, and they won 6-0. And people were maybe getting a little bit carried away with that. I think this was maybe a bit of a sobering reality this weekend. They've come up again in one of only probably 2 games that they've got left that there's any actual pressure on them. And, I mean, the performance was decent enough, but yet again, the players just don't seem to hit the heights on these high pressure games.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Obviously, the actual job in hand for Dominic McKay specifically, obviously the team manager and director of football aside, the recruitment again. I mean, yet again, Celtic fans again were probably saying, "Oh no, well maybe we'll keep him. Maybe we could extend his loan deal." And now it's a case of rip it up, start again.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned a key couple of things to do with the game yesterday. We'll focus on individual incidents very shortly. Looking at some of the comments that are coming in order, director of football and then coach, same sort of thing. Begins with director of football and then management. I mean, Anthony, it was his first day today, so we're not expecting managerial announcements probably tonight, but I'm pretty sure that now he's in the door, like I say, he's going to get settled at his new desk. He's going to get little things in order. And then do you think we could see an accelerated new manager in the door at Celtic Park? Answer that question as well. Obviously, how important is it that he gets the right manager in the door? Because he needs to get this right. He needs to win over the Celtic fans right from day dot, doesn't he?
Yeah, it's a critical appointment on so many levels, and especially for Dominic McKay as he's coming into the club now, and this is his first big job, I guess, to pick the man who's going to lead this massive, what looks like a massive rebuild. I mean, I think if Celtic had won the game yesterday, it probably wouldn't have changed much in the grand scheme, but it would have maybe changed the vibe. People would be saying, oh, maybe we don't need such a big rebuild. Maybe we're not as far away as we initially thought, sort of thing. But I think yesterday's defeat and the manner of it has just highlighted that there is a big gulf. And when you factor in the players that Celtic are going to lose over the summer, in all probability, it just underlines how big a rebuild, certainly on the playing side, there is going to be. And to do that, obviously, they're going to need a head coach, they're going to need a director of football, a manager, whatever they have in mind in terms of the hierarchy and the leadership of the first team. They're going to have all that in place ideally before they start any sort of player rebuild and re-signing players on new contracts, moving players on and bringing new guys in. So it feels very hard to envisage Celtic being ready to hit the ground running next season, but that's the task facing Dominic McKay and the rest of the Celtic hierarchy at the moment. They have to somehow, from the wreckage that there currently is at the end of this season, get a team that's ready to compete, not just in the Premiership next year and go toe-to-toe with Rangers, but also be ready to hold their own in the European qualifiers.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Andy Walker went in quite hot. He reckons the arrival of Dominic McKay is not a moment too soon after a season of dire results that has seen them lose out on their 10-in-a-row dream, crash out of the Champions League at the qualifier stage and fail to lay a glove on rivals Rangers. Now, I think we discussed this maybe last week, Stephen, possibly the week before, about the amount of time it took Steven Gerrard to come in and get a proper tune from his team. It didn't happen overnight. Are Celtic fans going to have to be patient and give Dominic McKay time to appoint possibly the right director of football, the right management team, the right structure from the hierarchy before we see the results on the park?
Yes, yeah, they will have to. I mean, it's a bit of a shame on Dominic McKay because he is, in all intents and purposes, a CEO. He's a pen pusher, a businessman who's there to kind of run the business side of Celtic. But because of timing and kind of what's going on in the wider sort of spectacle of the club, is that if the managerial appointment is the wrong appointment, if the director of football appointment doesn't work out, he's going to be held almost responsible for that. And despite the fact that it's not really his remit, it's not his job. So it is a bit of a poison chalice he's walking into. But from what I know of Dominic McKay, he's a big Celtic fan, so he will know the issues. He doesn't need anybody to teach him what the fans are complaining about, what needs fixed, what needs looked at in great detail. He will know all these things. He will have been involved, again, probably unofficially, in terms of the discussions that have gone on with what Peter Lawwell's role was, what Dominic McKay's role is going to be going forward. So, I mean, I'm not naive. I don't think any of us are naive enough to think that these things haven't already been discussed in great detail. But at the same time, I mean, I had a massive rant, obviously, a couple of weeks ago about my club Hearts on how they were looking at it purely as a sort of business and the football the side of things had been neglected. Celtic are probably in a reasonably similar situation where they've taken their eye off the ball. I mean, it's not been neglected, but they've certainly taken their eye off the ball, football-wise. I mean, you look at the issues they're having with academy players moving on, with obviously the issues they've had with the first team, the balance of the squad is not quite right, the coaching standards have not been there. So somebody somewhere is taking their eye off the ball when it comes to the football side of the business. And I think Dominic McKay will probably be his number one priority, is to get their customers, first and foremost, back on side by putting a decent product on the park. But as Tony said, and we've discussed this on numerous occasions, these things just don't happen overnight. You have to get very, very lucky. And even with the best wind in your sails, and if you've got say a 60 or 65% success rate in your recruitment, that a lot of teams will think that's fantastic, it's great. Celtic need probably 80-90% of their recruitment this summer to be at a good level, and for these guys to hit the ground running, because they're going to have to replace such a large swathe of their first team squad with players who not only are good footballers but good people, good guys that are going to kind of like run the club. The expectation levels of the club are sometimes too big for some. So it's very difficult to see just now how Celtic are going to sort of even just be on the same level as Rangers going forward. It's just, especially given the fact that after this game at the weekend, Rangers are just going to be even more confident if they can go the full season unbeaten and win the Scottish Cup. I mean, they're going into next season on an absolute flyer, and Celtic have got even more ground to make up.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Stephen touched on it twice, the recruitment side of things, Anthony. I mean, the easy thing to do is throw money and just buy in players left, right and centre. I mean, that didn't work out with the likes of Barkas, and there's a couple other players that are obviously on big money. I mean, even if you look at Edouard yesterday, but then you compare players of that stature, money-wise, from what Celtic paid for Turnbull, for example, who you seem to be getting a lot more from him. I mean, recruitment is going to be the key point here for Celtic, isn't it?
Recruitment and how you integrate them into the team. I mean, I can't think of many examples of, unless Celtic have some other idea where they're going to promote loads of academy kids, which I can't envisage them doing. They are going to have to recruit. I don't imagine them suddenly throwing loads of youngsters in. We've seen Stephen Welsh. Even then, he's 21 now. I don't know if Celtic have the talent that they can just unleash loads of these sort of teenagers into the first team and suddenly expect them to go and hold their own against Rangers in a title race. I don't think that's realistic. So, yeah, assuming that the guys move, the guys we expect to move on, the likes of Edouard and Ayer, and possibly even somebody like Christie. If these guys move on and some of the loan boys go back to their parent clubs, then it's going to be at least half a team they're going to need to recruit or promote from their academy. And somehow they're going to have to get a cohesion that means they're ready. We spoke about this a couple of weeks ago. It's not just about signing good players. It's about getting them in a blend so that they can work together. And I mean, this is a completely random example, but the only time I can remember this in a Scottish football context of a team having a massive rebuild like this, just signing loads of random players and it all coming together nicely, is Hearts under Romanoff in 2005. But the key thing for Romanoff there was, well, what Hearts did there was they completely increased their budget that summer beyond all recognisable levels. Before that, they had been on a relative shoestring under Craig Levein and John Robertson. A lot of players were sort of moving on. It felt like the end of a cycle and things were fading. And Hearts supporters were worried about what was going to happen because they only had a core of maybe Andy Webster, Paul Hartley, Craig Gordon, Robbie Nielsen, guys like that. And that was a good core, don't get me wrong, but it was very much a team, where do we go from here sort of thing. And then suddenly Vladimir Romanov started bringing in all these different players from different parts of Europe, guys that we hadn't really heard of, but they were clearly a notch above what Hearts were used to. So, and they put them all together and it was just magical for about 3 or 4 months before George Burley got sacked. But I don't think Celtic are going to be in a position whereby they can obviously play the same money as what Hearts paid, but they need to go up a rung if they were going to take that approach of just throwing money at it. They need to probably spend more money than they've even spent last summer or the summer before, for instance. And as you say, money's not always the answer. They could sign 4 or 5 £10 million players, and there's no guarantee that they're going to be able to handle Scottish football, be able to click as a team and play with the intensity required to win every week and mount a title challenge against Rangers. So it's a very difficult situation. I mean, you're going to, first and foremost, you need to get a manager who's ready for this task and who understands just how big it is. You don't want somebody who's just coming in because they can put it on their CV that they were manager at Celtic. It's got to be somebody who absolutely understands how big a job this is and is willing to take on all the difficulties that are going to go with that, because and just have a vision of how they can bring it all together. Because, I mean, obviously you and I are not qualified to do that in terms of how you put a football team together, but I wouldn't know where to start in terms of trying to put a Celtic team on the pitch that can compete with Rangers in the current position. I wouldn't know where to look. I genuinely wouldn't know who to go and sign, which players are going to do a job. And certainly in the market that Celtic will be shopping in, you're a hostage to fortune in terms of you could probably have loads of guys that look good on paper. I'm sure Barkas looked good on paper when Celtic were recruiting last summer. But ultimately, they need to come in and be equipped to do it as a team. And if there's no core at Celtic, with Scott Brown moving on, who's going to drive that beyond the manager and beyond one or two? Obviously, you'll have McGregor there, and there will be one or two others, and the likes of Forrest, I dare say, will still be there. But it's going to be very hard for Celtic to build a new culture. But, I mean, these things happen at clubs. More clubs than Celtic have been through this, and it may be that they almost not write off next season by any stretch, but it may be that they have to. I mean, supporters generally aren't patient in general, football supporters, but it may be that you have to say, look, this is a sort of unique situation in the sense that there is such a big turnaround required, and Rangers are at such a level at the moment that it's going to be very hard to get to that level in a matter of months.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If we look at the game itself yesterday, obviously we know it finished Rangers 2, Celtic 0. A Davis overhead kick and a John Joe Kenny own goal sealed the deal for Rangers yesterday at Ibrox. We need to discuss, Stephen, obviously the chances were there for Celtic. Edouard's volley, his penalty, Elyounoussis 1-on-1, Stephen Welsh had a chance, Griffiths had a chance when he came on. It's not like Celtic never had an opportunity to take something from the game yesterday, was it?
No, they created plenty of chances. I mean, the first maybe, I don't know, the first 10 minutes of the game, I think, was kind of, people were trying to find their feet. But I think after Rangers scored that first goal, Celtic had a period of probably 10, 15 minutes, and Rangers were camped in, they couldn't get out their half. But it was the same old story for Celtic. They created chance after chance after chance, but I don't know whether it's a confidence, it's just they don't have that killer mentality that they've had for 10 years. I've heard a few folk talking about Edouard's performance yesterday, and I think, to me, if I was in charge of Celtic, he would not play for my team again.
I'm smiling because I'm going to go in hot on him on my next question, Stephen.
We'll touch on someone else then, because I just think there was his performance. Diego Laxalt was absolutely pathetic at left back. He obviously got hooked at half time. There was performances all over the park that you could probably pick out 3 players for Celtic who actually you could see were grafting, were trying different bits and pieces, and gave what I would class as a acceptable performance in the first half. In the second half, Celtic dominated the ball a lot more. They created, again, chance after chance after chance, but I always felt Rangers were in control of that match. I never ever felt that Rangers were kind of up against the ropes, and that sounds crazy because Celtic were creating so many chances, but they just looked comfortable. Yet again, it just we've said this time after time, but Rangers just look a team that are A, well coached, B, well drilled, and they are comfortable in their own skin. They know if one player's out of position, another one fills in for them. They know the system. They know what each other should be doing, the movements, the patterns of play. Celtic just do not seem to have that. They're creating chances, but they're not coming through intricate passing moves, or they're kind of just trying different bits and pieces. And to be fair, when you're a team who are up against it and you have got that situation, it is a good thing. At least you're creating these chances. But the confidence in that group is just, to me, looks shot to bits. And yet again, an opportunity there to save a bit of face. But when the pressure's on, they crumbled. And it's been the same old story all the way through this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I did say that I was going to go in hot on Edouard. Without sounding too cheesy, I mean, I've worked on radio stations before in the past. I've been involved here at State of Mind for almost a year now and done countless amount of podcasts, live shows. I've not once swore. Now, it's not a bad swear word, but Edouard could not be arsed yesterday. That is the bottom line. That is a be-all and end-all. A poor penalty, a poor free kick that led to the penalty. His body language just looked like, again, he couldn't be arsed. He would rather be elsewhere. That's how it looked for me from the outside looking in. I am not a Celtic fan. None of us on here are actual Celtic fans. But, Anthony, to pull on a Hoops jersey, the support they've got, a club that size, you need to be all in, don't you?
Yeah, 100%. You need to play, especially in a derby. I mean, passion's probably the first thing you need to bring to the table. I know that sounds cliched and a bit old school, but if you go into an Old Firm game and you're not ready to go to war, so to speak, and again, I don't like using these terms, but they are key factors in Scottish football, particularly in derbies. And if you're leading the Celtic attack, you need to show some sort of fight, as well as quality. You need to be willing to do everything, run the channels, put your body on the line, go up against defenders, make things difficult. And if Celtic don't have that, then they're going to struggle to win a derby. And when you've got a guy as talented as Edouard is, because he's clearly on his day, for me, he's the most talented striker in Scotland. People will argue that Griffiths and Morelos as well are in a similar bracket in terms of quality, or some people might say Griffiths isn't. But again, Griffiths, it probably comes down to the way he's been applying himself more so than his lack of quality. But certainly with Edouard, there's no doubt about his quality. When he's on it, he's absolutely brilliant. But again, he's still a young guy. He's probably been sort of gripped by this malaise at Celtic. They're not playing the slick, free-flowing football that he was used to in his first couple of years here. So, I mean, it's natural that his form would slump, but certainly it shouldn't drop off as badly as it has. I mean, just going off on a tangent here, you touched on David Turnbull and suggesting that was a good signing by Celtic, which obviously it has proven to be. If there's there's clearly question marks over all of Celtic's strikers at the moment. Lee Griffiths could be going to Hibs. If you're thinking about going domestically, then I think probably the only striker you could think about at the moment is Kevin Nisbet. I saw him yesterday and he missed a lot of chances, but a very good player. And he's on an upward trajectory in terms of Raith Rovers 2 seasons ago, Dunfermline Athletic last year, and now Hibs into the Scotland squad, getting linked with moves to the English Championship. If Celtic were to go down the road of looking domestically for talent, then probably Nisbet's the one that is knocking on the door for a move. I mean, he's playing at the third best team in the country at the moment, and he's 16 goals this season. Decent chance he might yet hit 20, and he's physical as well, which for me is always a big thing with a centre forward. He's got the stature, and I suppose there's an element of Lee Griffiths has been seen as Celtic's main Scottish striker for so long, and now it feels like he's drifting towards Hibs. Will we see a situation whereby Nisbet goes another direction? I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if Nisbet's quite at the level to lead the Celtic attack, but if you are talking about domestic players, then he will be one who will be prominent in anybody's thoughts, I would imagine, given the season, not just this season, but the way his career's gone over the last 3 years.
See, the thing is, though, like if rumours are to be believed, Celtic are on the verge of recouping the money that they got for that they paid out for Klimala, which is somewhere in the region of £3.5 million. If they offered Hibs probably half of that, they would probably accept it for Kevin Nisbet. I mean, they were on the. I know they eventually turned it down, but it was somewhere in the region of 1.5 million that Birmingham were offering. So even if you say £2 million that Celtic offer Hibs for Nisbet, I mean, you're not going to be far off getting a deal over the line. If they've got a guy with Klimala who has offered nothing, he's offered zero in the time that he's been at the club. This just shows you the markets that Celtic could exploit if they were really serious about doing it. Like they spent that money on him. Again, another example. There's been loads of chat in the last couple of days about Ivan Toney. Ivan Toney was in the building at Lennoxtown. He was up here. He was desperate to sign for Celtic because they're such a big club. For whatever reason, the deal couldn't get done over the line. He's now the top goal scorer in the Championship, and he's worth probably somewhere in the region of £30 million. So it just goes to show that if Celtic didn't just go for a flashy signing, because that's what Ayeti was. They spent £5 million on Ayeti, who's barely done anything, he's barely scratched the surface. Klimala, £3.5 million. Terrible. Like has never got anywhere near a run of games in Celtic's team for the reasons being obviously he's not impressed in training or in the games that he has played. If you could get Kevin Nisbet for half of that amount, that just shows you what Celtic could be capable of if they go looking in the right markets.
Yeah,
I'm not saying Nisbet is definitely of the calibre for Celtic, but certainly if you were looking domestically, he's the one. But then going back, then you've got to say, have Celtic learned lessons? Because obviously the last player to emerge from Hibs who was of that sort of pedigree, I guess, was John McGinn. Celtic wanted him, didn't stump up the money for him, missed out on him, and look where he is now. I'm not saying Kevin Nisbet's going to go to that level, but you just don't know. The way Nisbet's career's going, you would not bet against him going to that level whereby he's playing in the English Premier League in a couple of years. So for all the risks Celtic have taken by throwing money about in the last few years, as you say, £5 million on Ajeti or Klimala, which one was it? 5.
Ayeti was 5 and Klimala was 3.5.
Yeah, and the goalkeeper as well. I mean, when you're spending that level of money, surely there's less risk attached to somebody like Nisbet, and you have a chance that he's going to do something like what David Turnbull's done, what Lee Griffiths did when they signed him before. And
you're right in what you're saying, it is a risk, but surely it's even if he comes in and he doesn't reach the heights that we think he could reach, even if he's just reaching the heights that he's at this moment in time, he's still a better option than Klimala.
He'll guarantee you 10 goals a season, you would think, as a worst case scenario coming off the bench. I don't really see what they've got to lose. I mean, it's a massive jump to go from Hibs to Celtic. That's a big thing. But I think if anybody can handle it, it's a guy who's taken the jump from Dunfermline to Hibs and taking it in his stride.
Yeah, there's nothing to say that he's going in. He has to go in there as the Celtic number 9, the guy who's going to lead the line every week. If he's there as part of a striking group, maybe 2 or 3 strikers that they interchange here and there depending on what games they play. There's no risk in my eyes. There's no risk in getting a guy like that.
Yeah, no, and I think you're onto something. I could probably sit and talk about this all hour till 7:30. I mean, you only have to look at the likes of Scott Brown, who made the jump, Stephen Whittaker at Rangers, Kevin Thompson, Craig Gordon, even like you say, Lee Griffiths. I mean, it is maybe an old school tactic recruiting within Scotland, but it's a positive one. It works. Like we say, I mean, Chris Boyd, Kilmarnock, Burke as well, who did the same.
Even Naismith.
Exactly. There's countless amounts of them. I mean, it'd be good to see more young Scottish players that are at the likes of Hibs, like the other teams, maybe make that extra jump up to Celtic and Rangers again, and it might prove better for Steve Clarke as well in the long run.
I dare say Hibs fans will not be thanking us for having this conversation, which I totally understand. The fans of Hibs, Hearts, Aberdeen, any other Scottish Premiership club don't like the players automatically being linked with with the old firm, and if their players are to move on, generally they prefer that they go to England so they don't have to play against them.
Exactly. I mean, looking at some of the comments, Edward is pathetic. We should have sold him last season. He is truly pathetic. No, I mean, we kind of touched on that. Certainly looking at yesterday's performance anyway. We need players with ability who want to play for Celtic. I agree. You need to be able to...
just going back to the Edward thing, just very quickly, a very quick point on him. You guys were saying that his performance was more like a lazy performance. That wasn't the thing that angered me looking at his performance. The thing that angered me was it was almost like he was trying to get things for his show reel, so that he was thinking, when I move on for here, I'll be able to show, like my agent will be able to distribute. So he had the penalty, the obviously... He was so low on confidence in that game that a striker, any striker worth their salt, if they're not having a good game, sometimes they go, someone else take it out. The volley one, he's tried to like flick it with outside his boot when it was easier to just steady yourself and side foot it or lace it, just sclaff it. It was going in and you're hitting the net. It was more like it seemed to be in the back of his mind that I need to score a beautiful goal here, or I need to do something, a beautiful moment in this game that I can basically, like the teams when they look at it, they're going to see that highlight on YouTube. Or that's the thing that annoyed me. It wasn't his sort of languid style, because that's just what you've come to get with Edward. But it was more of his selfish attitude.
Yeah, no, exactly. Hi to Jonathan, who's put this comment up. Can the panel please give opinion on potential ESL? That is coming, Jonathan. We're here for over another half hour. We will discuss that. It is coming up in the show, so make sure you stay tuned. And someone's out for a little bit of fishing tonight. Hi to Paul. Are you all Hibbies? We said we weren't Celtic fans. I mean, Stephen's quite an open Hearts fan. We're football fans. We're Scottish football fans. And that's what we're going to be discussing every week on the Play On Scottish Football Show. Right, on to just a couple of quick points on the game yesterday. It was the biggest game of the weekend, obviously. You got to talk about Diego Laxalt, Stephen. I mean...
listen, mate, it's not even worth talking about, to be perfectly honest. His performances for Celtic in general have been terrible. Like, they've not been great. The money that they're paying him wages wise, he's got nowhere near that level. He's an AC Milan left back who has looked like he wouldn't be out of place playing for, you guessed it, Hamilton Accies.
I mean, but that's the other flip side of the coin. I mean, you've got a fullback like Diego Laxalt, that Milan player, the highly waged player, and then you've got Nathan Patterson, who plays right back for Rangers, who had an absolute great game yesterday. 19-year-old Scottish lad, could be getting called up for the Euros. That's the difference, isn't it?
But then even if you compare it to Celtic's own ranks, Greg Taylor's a better option than Diego Laxalt, and he has been all season. Greg Taylor's done very little wrong to be dropped. But again, the powers that be at Celtic, whether it be Peter Law or whether it be the management just trying to justify their position, they're saying, we're paying this guy, whatever it may be, pick a figure out there, 50 grand a week. We need to try and justify this by giving him a game. He's no better than Greg Taylor. Greg Taylor has maybe not set the heather on fire this season, but he's certainly been more consistent and more. He's given more in his performances than Diego Laxalt has. So I just think that, comparing him to Patterson, but I mean, Patterson was outstanding for Rangers again. I mean, whether he should have played or not is another debatable fact that we'll probably not go into. But it's he was outstanding. But again, Greg Taylor should have played at left back, and I think going forward again. These loan guys, if you've not got any ambition to keep them beyond next season, why are they playing? I don't. I can get Scott Brown playing in big games like that because just the style of play and what he gives. But anybody else who's not going to be at the club next season, why on earth are you still playing them? Just get rid.
Yeah. Quick one last point, Anthony, before we move on to the next point on today's show. Ryan Jack, he was out of yesterday's match due to injury. He's now been ruled out of the Euros as well. We've talked about possibly Nathan Patterson deserving a spot in that European squad, Steve Clarke's squad, sorry. I mean, how big a miss will Ryan Jack be?
I mean, he's obviously had a great season for Rangers, and I dare say he would have been a starter for Scotland at the Euros. So in that regard, he would be a miss. But I think if you're going to lose a player, apart from left back, then central midfield is probably the area where Scotland can cope in terms of they have good options there. I mean, McTominay will. Who have you got in there? McTominay, McGinn, McGregor can all play in there. So I don't think Scotland are going to be lacking in terms of quality for that position. Yeah, they would have preferred to have Ryan Jack in the squad. Of course they would, but I don't think you'll see a significant drop-off if you find it's McGregor and McTominay that are holding the fort in the midfield, or even if McGinn has to drop back. I know that's not ideal, but he could play in there, and obviously you've got other guys who can come in, and I think Armstrong can probably play deeper if he needed to, and John Fleck as well. So
and
there are options there.
And Kenny McLean as well. Kenny McLean.
So I mean,
the championship. So
there's plenty of options in there. Yes, they would rather have Ryan Jack because obviously he's been one of the best players in the league this season when he's been fit, but it's not going to be a major issue for Scotland. I don't think it's going to necessarily be the difference between them competing and not competing.
Yeah,
I think it would be a bigger issue if one of the strikers was to go down, for instance, if Che Adams or even Dykes.
What do you mean? What do you mean we've just lost Ollie McBurney, mate? Like it's a disaster. We should be mourning right now. Eh?
That's my next question. How big a miss is Ollie McBurney going to be?
I'll give you a clue. This month, none,
exactly.
0.
So yeah, we do need to talk about the European Super League. Obviously, out with Scottish football, it is probably the biggest talking point in the whole of the world of football, I would say. But it has, and it could potentially have a massive impact on Scottish football. I mean, Neil Doncaster's come out already, and he said that he thinks the idea is a clear and present danger of the sport that we love. And I mean, Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City, Man United and Tottenham are among 12 clubs that have agreed to establish a new midweek competition. I believe that the likes of Porto have been invited. Obviously, the Germans have been invited. PSG was invited. I heard a rumour as well, Galatasaray and Fenerbahce might well have been on the phone list as well. Why were the likes of Rangers and Celtic not invited to join this European Super League, do you think, Stephen?
Oh, I mean, it's a private members club. I mean, the one Rangers are no surprise to me, but the one if they're going to approach anyone, it would be Celtic, because you've got, I mean, people will not like me saying this, but you've got Peter Law, who's been in the pockets of the people at UEFA, or certainly had the ear of the people at UEFA for a long time. So he's obviously been in plenty dodgy boardrooms and probably been privy to many of these chats about whether it be Atlantic leagues, European Super Leagues, breakaway factions. You sometimes get these stories that appear, and to be honest, all the way through my adult life watching football, whenever there's been any sort of chat of Rangers and Celtic leaving to go to an Atlantic league or anything along those lines, I've just laughed it off and went, yeah, whatever, that's fine. This seems to be something that's actually got a bit of substance to it. And not in terms of Rangers and Celtic leaving, but then it's like a domino effect. Like, you've got these 12 teams, which they're now saying could be extended to 15 teams, who are basically trying to create almost like an NFL franchise system where they're all going to go into this closed members club. No one can get relegated. No one can. It's just a money making machine. People will say, "Oh, well, it's the best teams in the world playing against the other best teams in the world." It's not competitive. You've not earned the right to be in that competition. So, like a perfect example, Arsenal. When was the last time Arsenal qualified to play in the Champions League? Arsenal have finished 8th last season and are about to finish 9th this season in the English Premier League.
Yeah, surely Leicester deserve a place in there in front of them.
They can't even qualify to get into the Champions League in their own domestic league. But because they are owned by an American and because they have this history, and Arsenal are a massive brand worldwide. I mean, they're probably, out with Man United, are probably the biggest English club worldwide in terms of their global branding. That's the reason that they've been brought in, not for any prowess or success of what they've done on a football field. So in terms of the impact that this might have on Scottish football and why Rangers and Celtic have not been invited straight away to this top table, is probably because of their pedigree in Europe. I mean, Rangers and Celtic are both massive football clubs. We know that. But do the powers that be in world football, do they see the same thing? Or do they see two big clubs playing in what would be classed as a Diddy league, and they just share it between them? One year Rangers will win it, next year Celtic will win it. No one else gets anywhere close. So do they look at that and think, well, but drilling down into it, I mean, Rangers and Celtic are as big a club as Tottenham Hotspur are. I mean, there's no debate. Atletico Madrid, they're as big a club as them. It's just that they don't have the kind of global reach that these guys have had because they haven't been able to successfully qualify for the Champions League on a regular enough occasion to be able to kind of financially compete with these guys. So the impact that it may have going forward is that if these 6 clubs decide that they are going to, like, if the English league close off to them and say, you choose, you play in the European Super League or you stay and play in the football pyramid in England, and they choose not to, then it opens up a potential that Celtic and Rangers or Celtic or Rangers may be asked or looked at as a potential replacement to come in and sort of join the English pyramid. But then that opens up a massive can of worms as well as what level do Rangers and Celtic go in at? Do they, and then what's left to the rest of us? I'll be honest with you, as a Hearts fan, and this might be completely short-sighted, and I think Rangers and Celtic leaving would be a disaster for Scottish football financially. But I think overall, if you probably fast forward 10 years into the future, the overall picture of Scottish football will be a hell of a lot healthier than it is just now. Because at this moment in time, we've got these 2 giants that no one can compete with unless you have an unbelievable season. And even then, you're only competing with them up to a point. I mean, the best Hearts teams I've ever seen have competed with Rangers and Celtic probably until February. And then they've fallen off and Rangers or Celtic have gone on and comfortably won the league. Aberdeen, the same. So if they were to leave Scottish football and whatever guise it may be, whether it be another remix of this Atlantic League or whether they join the English League or whatever it may be, I think it's healthy for Scottish football overall. I mean, it's going to be a short term, a lot of teams are going to suffer, but if you look at it as an overall picture of what it could be, I think it should be an exciting time.
Yeah, no, fair point, Stephen. It's all ifs and buts, like you say. It'll be interesting to see how this European Super League, whatever they're calling it, pans out. I mean, Anthony, there's a couple of comments coming in. We've talked about, obviously, the money side of things. I mean, Brown Warrior here has said, greed, just absolute greed. Someone else, David here, has said, everyone loves money. Get on it. You're going to make a buck or two out of it. I can see that point as well, but how important is it, Anthony, that if these clubs do this, to get the balance right between what the fans want and what's good for the club?
I think just by entertaining it, they're not doing what the fans want. I mean, you see the reaction when Man United and Liverpool and Arsenal tweeted it last night. Their own fans are going mental. So I think they've already shown complete disregard for the fans by even entertaining this situation in the middle of a pandemic. I think the likes of, I'm not fingering any particular club, but certainly the Arsenal situation and the Tottenham situation highlights this, and even the fact the 2 Milan clubs are involved, it just highlights an arrogance. I mean, as much as these clubs are big clubs and they're obviously global brands, in terms of their football accomplishments in recent years, what have they actually done? Like, what gives them the right to say that we should be part of this elite 15, 20 team breakaway? I don't see. I mean, you can almost understand Real Madrid and Barcelona driving this. You can almost understand Manchester City being involved in this. But the rest of the teams involved have not really done very much in terms of European accomplishments, dominating their domestic. Juventus have dominated their league in Italy. Fair play. They probably would have claims on that basis. But even then, what are they doing this season? They're not exactly pulling up trees. I mean, it just smacks of arrogance. We are one of the biggest clubs in the world, therefore we should join this breakaway. And I think in a way, I'm quite glad that so many of the teams that have broken away or that are planning to break away are struggling so badly at the minute, because it almost completely undermines it. If they were all going to win their leagues this season and they were all in the last 4 of the Champions League or whatever, then you would say fair play. Maybe there is a point to be made here. But the fact is, I don't think. I mean, obviously, Barca and Real Madrid have been at the forefront of European football for the past decade. Man United have done very little since Ferguson left. Tottenham, they've been to a final, but beyond that, what have they actually done in Europe, really? Mm-hmm. Not a great deal. English football, they've not done that much. They've been an entertaining side to watch, don't get me wrong. As I said, Juventus have dominated the Italian league, so Milan and Inter have done very. I mean, I absolutely love Milan and Inter and what they stand for in terms of their history, because I love Italian football. But that's going back to the 90s when it was real football, and this is just so far away from real football that I think the whole sort of football supporter base, fans of all clubs are completely up in arms about this. It feels like they're taking a wrecking ball to tradition here to go and chase the pound. And I hope that Manchester United and Liverpool fans, I mean, they're two traditional English football powerhouses, real sort of good values at their core in terms of the fan base. And I really hope the support stand firm against this and don't go with the clubs on it. I mean, I dare say there will be some supporters who are like happy to go along for the ride and want to watch. I'm saying Paris Saint-Germain, they're not even in it. I'm doing them a disservice by including them at the moment. But there will be people who want to watch Barcelona play Manchester City every week. But I mean, I've sort of lost interest in the Champions League in recent times. I find, and don't get me wrong, I'll still watch the final and stuff like that, but it's not, it just doesn't feel real. It feels like computer game stuff, and this is going to be a completely different level because you don't need to do anything to get into it. You're in it and you're safe. It's completely against all what I think football stands for, and it's a really bad development for the game. I understand Stephen's point about it could open opportunities for other teams to move into different positions in the food chain, for instance, if the Old Firm were to move to England, and that's a completely different discussion. But it would certainly, I mean, you'd then have a situation where Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen, Dundee United, St Johnstone, Dundee even, all these teams will believe they can win the Scottish title, which is something that I think most Scottish football fans out with the Old Firm have craved for the last 35 years. So in that regard, if something like that was to happen, I would be all for it. But that's more to do with Scottish football reinventing itself rather than encouraging this breakaway, which I think is completely against all that sort of what I believe football to be.
Yeah, I mean,
the problem that you've got is that all these clubs, well, the majority of these clubs are owned by majority US conglomerates or US people, that they are looking at it purely from they don't buy into fans. They don't buy into, they look at it as customers. So if you take George Henry as a perfect example from Fenway Sports Group, who own Liverpool, they have got, 50, 60,000 season ticket holders. Those 50, 60,000 season ticket holders should be your bread and butter. They should be the most important people at your club. For a club like Liverpool, that is not the case anymore. They've proved this season, they've played in front of empty stadiums and still turned massive profits. They look at it as our overall customer base. And if they're saying, well, our customer base is 30% in the US, 5% in China, they'll look at it as an overall global thing. And they're saying, well, all these guys who live in the Wirral, Liverpool, the surrounding areas, Preston, anybody who lives there will obviously have a valued interest in them playing domestic football because it gives them the opportunity to go to Anfield, watch the games, go and travel away. You're not telling me that you're going to have 10,000 people who are from Liverpool who can afford to go to every second week, Spain or wherever, Italy, and travel for an away game on a Wednesday night every second week for the entire season. I mean,
and do the domestic season. It's just
it's absolutely impossible, and that's the problem that they've got now. The problem that they have is, and this is what makes me so happy to be a supporter of what you would call a provincial club in Scotland. That my voice and my pound that I give to my football club is still is as important as everybody else who goes to the games. Whereas at big clubs, when your club gets so big that you as a supporter are no longer important, your opinion doesn't matter. Whether you come to the game or don't come to the game, whether you renew your subscription or whether you buy a strip, they don't care. They're an entity now. They're no longer Liverpool. They're no longer this club who prided themselves in being part of the community and did so much to support these people that died at Hillsborough. And you've got all this history behind this at a club like Liverpool, and you're prepared to basically just burn that and say, you guys don't matter to us anymore. We're now playing on a different playing field. We're basically basing our numbers on guys who live in America, Canada.
Yep.
And that's the thing. We've spoken about it for a long time. I mean, people take a little pot shot at the English Premier League, calling it the tourist league these days because there's so many people from abroad, which is fine, no problem with that. But it is because the costs have gone so high to get into English Premier League matches. you do find that the hardcore, the working class locals, a lot of them are being completely. I mean, this has been going on for years. This discussion about ticket prices and things like that, but people genuinely can't afford that. Who would have gone week in, week out 20, 30 years ago can't afford to do that. And now, if you're going to this level of competing in the what are we calling it, Super League, I mean, that's a different level. I mean, I'm sure ticket prices will probably go up to reflect that, because they'll know they'll be able to get people coming over from Asia or whatever to come and watch the games. And as long as there is going to be people that are willing to do that, then it almost gives justification to the powers that be to crack on with it, which is the worry that even if the hardcore, the Liverpool, Manchester United, Tottenham natives all rail against it, I mean, as you say, the money men will just see an opportunity to draw in a different fan base from overseas. So yeah, it feels like another bad move. I mean, I'm a wee bit of a, what's the word? I've always I hate modern stadiums going up. I hate when a team, for instance, I hate the fact Aberdeen are going to be moving away from Pittodrie. That doesn't sit well with me. I can see why it's happening, but Pittodrie is just full of history, full of tradition, and I think it's a travesty that Pittodrie is going to get trashed. And I think probably going back 20, 30 years ago, that's where football started to lose its soul, when you were started to demolish all these stadiums where memories were made when kids were growing up and they used to go to these ramshackle old stadiums, but there was so much tradition, character associated with the stadiums. And so many clubs all over the world have gone away from that, which I understand, things modernise, things move on. I'm very much, so I would rather go to an old rickety, like I was at Stair Park yesterday for the Stranraer Hibs game, and I loved being in that sort of stadium, as opposed to being in one of these new builds where one size fits all sort of thing that you get these days when they throw up an all-seater. I mean, I'm going to an extreme level there of going back to basics, but football has got so far away from that now, where it's going to watch a game in the Super League is just going to be a totally different ball game to watching what I perceive to be real football. That's what I sort of grew up watching, and what you can still find, especially if you go into the lower leagues, you can still find it where you feel close to the action and you just feel like it's a proper community environment, whereas this is the complete opposite end of the scale. And the problem is it's been done with clubs who Manchester United, Liverpool, AC Milan, even Barcelona, clubs that are fundamentally just really traditional clubs within their own areas. And it's sad that it's gone like that. And I just hope something can be done to pull it back, because it does feel like we're going towards the abyss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Brown Warrior again's been on. Celtic and Rangers will be swiftly invited into the Premiership if this transpires. Just you watch. I mean, that's it. I mean, we're discussing that just now because we're a Scottish football show, and this could have an impact on Scottish football, so it'll be interesting to see how it develops, and obviously we'll be discussing it every week here on the Play On. Anthony, you did mention we're going to go from talking about AC Milan, Barcelona, Tottenham Hotspur, Man United to Stranraer. You made the 6-hour round trip down to Stair Park yesterday. You were on press duties to watch Stranraer against Hibs in the Scottish Cup, where it finished Stranraer 0, Hibs 4. Goals from Doyce, Nisbet and a Boyle double were enough to book Jack Ross's side into the last 8 of the Scottish Cup. Like I say, you were in attendance there, mate. Was it as one-sided as the scoreline suggest?
I would say it probably was, yeah. I mean, the early stages, Hibs had control of the game. They asserted themselves pretty well in the early stages, and Stranraer, I don't think, had any chances in the first half. Although Hibs didn't blow them to pieces by any stretch, but you always felt the opening goal was coming, and once they got their noses in front, there was only going to be one winner. But I was really impressed with Hibs in terms of the way they went about their business. Yes, people look at it and say, well, 4-0 at Hibs, that's what should happen, but as we saw with Hearts and Brora a few weeks back, it doesn't always work like that. So Hibs got the goal. They were professional. They were clinical. They managed the game well. There was a little spell after half-time where Stranraer looked like they might be able to muster something. They had a couple of half chances. But then once the second goal goes in, it was obviously game over, and then they sort of turned on the style in the second half. Martin Boyle, tremendous. Like the front three were very good for Hibs in general and have been for some time, but I love watching Martin Boyle when he's in that form. I think by his own standards, he's probably not been quite as consistent this season as he maybe has been in the last couple of seasons. But certainly, I mean, his stats are great. His assists, he's now on He's assisted loads of goals for Doidge and Nisbet, and he's scored 14 goals himself, which is an incredible return for a winger. And he, for me, especially in the absence of Scott Allen, he's the guy that sets the tone for Hibs. If he's in the mood and he's on the front foot, he can elevate Hibs from being a pretty average side to being a real quality side in terms of the way he takes on fullbacks. Just effortless at times, and he's got good deliveries. He's added so much to his game over the past few years, and he, for me, is still the X factor player in the Hibs team. I know Nisbet and Porteous and Doig are the guys that are getting linked to move us away to other clubs. They're obviously a bit younger than Boyle is. Boyle's kicking on late 20s now. So whether his chance of a big move has passed him by, I don't know. But certainly he's the one for me that really gives Hibs that bit of spark. And if he's on it, Hibs are usually on it. So yeah, I mean, they're in a really good place at the minute. They're looking strong for third place in the league, 4 points ahead of Aberdeen with 4 games to play. And they're now in the last 8 of the Scottish Cup with a home game against Motherwell. So I mean, they've got to really fancy their chances of a good finish to the season.
Yeah, I mean, but just sticking with you, Anthony, like we say, you were at the game yesterday, Stranraer against Hibs tie. You would expect Stranraer would bring out a good support. Obviously, I noticed on Sports Scene there was supporters round the park. You would fancy Hibs to bring a few busloads down as well. What was it like being in the stadium with obviously still no fans?
I probably didn't notice it quite as much as I would have if it was in a bigger stadium, because just for clarity, this was the first time I've been in a stadium for 13 months since the St Mirren Hearts game last year. And obviously that day fans were packed in everywhere, and the stadium was full. I don't know, maybe about 8,000 or whatever at St Mirren Park. So you're all condensed in. So that was a completely different experience to yesterday. But I did still feel like there was an event going on because it was on the TV. There was lots of sort of media people kicking about. There was lots of guys from the BBC milling about, TV crews, and just people walking about before and outside the stadium. The TV guys were set up behind one goal, and in the stand, because it's a very small main stand at Stranraer, people were dotted about, press people and officials and substitutes. So even though it wasn't full with supporters, you still felt there was quite a lot of people round about you, obviously socially distanced, but it didn't feel like the empty sort of cavern that I guess it would be if you were at, say, a Hibs game at Easter Road. I spoke to a colleague and he says this was a totally different experience to going to Easter Road all season when there's been no fans in there, because it's so big. You notice it a lot more in a stadium like that. But yeah, it was strange being in a stadium with no fans. But as you said, there was probably about maybe a couple of dozen Stranraer and Hibs fans over a wall and behind a fence looking in. So you still felt there was people looking in, which probably added to it. But it was good to listen to the players. Like, you can hear a lot more of what's going on in the park. I mean, I noticed Ryan Porteous really loud and aggressive. I mean, you maybe wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that from watching on the sidelines, but he is the vocal one in the Hibs team, the one that you're constantly hearing, which you wouldn't necessarily expect because he's one of the younger ones. But I thought that was really interesting, the way he's really on it, his strikers and stuff like that. And it was good to see that side of it, and you hear the little bits of needle and things like that. So yeah, it was my first experience of sort of post-pandemic football, well, post-pandemic, mid-pandemic football, and it was just good to be back in a stadium, to be honest. And yeah, a bit of an eye-opener, but it was good and enjoyable. Hopefully you guys are all back soon as well. I mean, because obviously you'd like to think we'll be in a position where by the start of next season we will have the supporters in good numbers.
Yeah, hopefully, fingers crossed. To be fair, Stranraer have more history than Tottenham. That's obviously because we were talking on the English Super League. There's this comment as well, Stephen, which is going to bring me to my next question. Obviously, like Anthony says, we now know that Hibs are going to meet Motherwell in the last 8 of the Scottish Cup. Hibs have had a good season. It looks like they're going to secure third place. After Rangers, I mean, could they potentially be one for the Scottish Cup? There's a message saying Hibs for the Scottish. Could they potentially lift silverware again this year?
Nope.
Moving on.
Nah. I think they've got as good a chance as anyone else. I mean, obviously the draw for the next round would need to be, if the draw. I would go as far as to say if the draw keeps Hibs and Rangers apart in the next round, that's the final for me. I think Hibs. I mean, Aberdeen on their day are maybe capable of getting a result against Hibs or Rangers potentially, but I just think they're the two strongest teams that are left in the competition, and it pains me to say it because mean, the last thing I want is for Hibs to win another Scottish Cup. I mean, God, no chance. But they have definitely got a chance to at least get into the final. And then every game they've played against Rangers this season that I've watched have been pretty close affairs. I mean, Rangers have arguably been comfortable in a lot of the games, but Hibs have pushed them, and there's never been that much in it. So, it doesn't even bear thinking about, David.
Yeah, I mean, there's Williams' comment.
I think something that could play into Hibs' favour here, they wouldn't look at it like that at the time, but the fact that they've had such a backlash when they've lost the two previous semi-finals, I think that'll focus their minds. I don't know how much of an impact that will have on the match day, but they know now that they can't take anything for granted. They may be the third best team in Scotland, and the league table will probably prove that, but the fact is they've gone out of semi-final to Hearts, who are in the Championship, and to St Johnstone, who are a good couple of places beneath them in the table. So I think that'll really give them extra focus. I mean, this game against Motherwell, Hibs should win it on paper, but Motherwell are a team, obviously, on their day, perfectly capable of going to Easter Road and winning. Hibs have been steeled by the fact that they've lost two semi-finals against, as I said, Hearts and St Johnstone, and also by the fact they've lost at home to Motherwell this season. So there certainly can't be any excuse for complacency this weekend in the quarterfinals. And then if they were to get through, they go in knowing we cannot, unless it was against Rangers where you could excuse them losing because Rangers are on a different level, they know that they can't really afford, in the eyes of their supporters, to lose another semi-final against a team that's deemed inferior to them.
Even Aberdeen, who you would probably deem are on the same level, they're not going to accept getting beat by Aberdeen either.
Yeah, it would just be bracketed as three semi-finals that they've bottled, so they can't afford that to happen. The only possible outcome that will spare Jack Ross from criticism, I know this sounds ridiculously harsh, but is if Hibs win the Scottish Cup or they go out to Rangers at some stage. Any other outcome and there will be a backlash.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure William won't thank me for having this on the screen for so long, but as a Hearts fan, Boyle is outstanding. That was us talking about Boyle in the Hibs squad. Amazes me that no one's signed him. Yeah, I kind of agree, he's a good player, so he might be one that moves away in the summer, but we'll soon find out.
I think if Neil Lennon was still at Celtic, there is a good chance he would have come into the reckoning, certainly this summer, but obviously that's not the scenario at the moment.
Time's getting away from us, as it seems to do every week. Maybe we need to ask for a 2-hour show on the, on the podcast. But hey, flying through some of the results in the Scottish Cup elsewhere, it finished Kilmarnock 3, Montrose 1. Kyle Lafferty was on the score sheet again, Anthony. You've kind of spoke well of him, saying that he's going to be a key figure and hopefully securing Kilmarnock's place in the top division, if you like, of Scottish football. It also finished St Johnstone 2, Clyde 0, so they're through to the next round. Aberdeen 2, Livingston 2 after extra time, and Aberdeen went through on penalties. On Friday night's fixture, it finished at Mirren 2, Inverness Cally 1. Like we know, Motherwell are through to the next round after a 1-1 draw with Greenock Morton, but Motherwell won 5-3 on penalties, and Dundee United beat Forfar 1-0. So we now know that the Scottish Cup quarter-finals are going to be between Aberdeen and Dundee United, Hibs against Motherwell, Kilmarnock against St Mirren, and Rangers against St Johnstone. Now, Hearts, your club, Stephen, they were not in action this week, but they do face Greenock Morton tomorrow night and Inverness Cally on Saturday, where they could be, and they are actually going to be, not they could be, they're going to be presented with the title. Now, we talked about this last week about the possible boycott of going up and lifting that trophy. Has there been any further discussions amongst the fans as to how the team should act this coming Saturday against Cally?
Nah, it's all gone very quiet, which to me would suggest that they're just going to do as they're told and get it done, get whatever they need to do. I don't think they're going to go over the top with any celebrations, and then it'll just be right. Count the days until we get the fixtures out for next season. And the good thing about it is that this one season where we've been in the Championship and it has been painful, is that if you're going to miss a season that you're not able to get into the grounds and watch games, as a Hearts fan, this has been the best season that you could have picked. So it's listen, it was just a night. It was nice to have a weekend where I wasn't absolutely furious at my football team for a change. So these 3 next games, they mean absolutely nothing. If Robbie Nielsen doesn't start wheeling out the youngsters, though, it'll just be another rod for the Hearts fans to beat him with, because I think we said this a couple of weeks ago. This is the first time in about 20 years that Hearts have had not 1 minute of action has been given to a teenager. So it's imperative that they start getting some of these kids who might have even a remote outside chance of having a career at Hearts and give them some game time to prove either one way or the other.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this season Hearts have made quite good friends with Inverness Cally Thistle after the whole donation of tickets. That is who they're going to lift the trophy against. Anthony, do you think that there'll be an agreement for I mean, we talked about the Celtic Rangers, but the whole guard of honour for the newly elected champions at Tynecastle, will Inverness Cally provide that, do you think?
Would it not be Morton tomorrow? We'd have to do it first, I think.
I think everybody is supposed to do it though.
Are they? Right, I thought it was when they lift the trophy.
Nah. It's if you're.
It's just when you come out after you've won the tournament.
If you're a champion and you've got any games left, then you're supposed to be applauded on the park by every team you play. So yeah, I would imagine Inverness will probably do it. But the interesting point is that it's now a kind of, well, not a straight shootout, but there's a bit of a race on between Inverness and Dundee for that last playoff spot. I mean, how ironic would it be for Inverness to somehow get a shock result at Tynecastle and Dundee to maybe slip up? And these guys who forgot to put their vote in at the end of last season, then not make the playoff. That would be sweet irony.
That's a very good point, by the way. I mean, like you say, is it time for Robbie to give the young guns a 90 minutes under the belt? I mean, something that come out as well to do with Hearts, Harry Cochrane's come out and said that he doesn't want to accept the new contract that he's been offered at Hearts. Is that a worrying sign, Anthony, that the young up-and-coming talent, because, I mean, he scored against Celtic in the famous 4-0 win for Hearts a few years back. He was quoted as being the next best thing with McDonald as well, who's now moved on. Is it a bit worrying for Hearts going forward that the youth's not coming through the system like it used to?
I think generally speaking, yeah, the Hearts fans want more youngsters to come through, but the Cochrane one for me is not a major issue in itself, because Harry Cochrane had a great platform. Craig Levein put him in as a 16-year-old, played him pretty regularly as a 16-year-old. Now, we're constantly being told that kids need to be exposed to first team football at 16, 17, not at 19, 20. So Craig Levein put him in, gave him his chance, and he looked very good in the early phase. You could see, well, you can still tell he's a quality footballer. But I think there was definitely a period where he started to plateau and you thought he's not really kicking on for one reason or another. I know young players have issues away from the pitch that we don't always know about. So I think I would be... With Cochrane, I think it was pretty clear he's not really done anything for Hearts for the last 3 years. He's been out on loan and by all accounts he's done okay, but he's not really pulled up trees anywhere. And I think he's very much sort of, that goal against Celtic has put him up on a pedestal where people still think of him as that player. But the reality is he hasn't shown that, certainly consistently, either at Hearts, in training, in matches, or in the lower leagues when he's gone out on loan. I'm not blaming Cochrane for that, because it's very hard to go in at that age and hold your own in the Hearts first team. But ultimately, he's not been able to do that, whereas Aaron Hickey and Andy Irvine have, and they've had a very similar introduction at the first team in terms of being put in at an early age. So I wouldn't necessarily say that the Cochrane situation is indicative of any major problems at Hearts, because Hickey, as I say, Hickey went in at 16, was played in a very poor Hearts team, played week in, week out, and now he's in Serie A. Andy Irvine, similar, given his debut at 17, he's had his stint out on loan, and he's come back and he's seized his chance at Hearts, whereas... so it's not like Hearts are denying players the chance to get in. If they are, generally speaking, nobody can convince me that Hearts have allowed any youngsters to leave that have subsequently gone on and proved that they were...
Josh Doig.
Well, Josh Doig, but he never actually got into the first team in the first place. But he was released very early.
They still let him go though.
I know, but then you could. Where do you stop with that? Hearts took a chance on Hickey from Celtic, so that almost offsets that in terms of he was released by Celtic and Hearts took him in. I think fundamentally you could ask questions of why are Hearts not producing more players who are of the required standard to come into the first team and compete. I don't think the Cochrane one is necessarily a failing on Hearts' part in terms of how they've managed them or anything like that. I think it's just got to a level where Cochrane needs to go somewhere else to try and rediscover his spark and his ability to dominate games as a central midfielder.
Yeah, I mean, other results from the weekend in the Championship. We now know that Alloa Athletics' 3-year stay in the Scottish Championship is over after a 2-1 defeat by Raith Rovers, confirming the hosts' relegation. It was also Arbroath 4, Ayr United 0, Dunfermline 3, Queen of the South 1. Fixtures happening this week in Scotland. Tomorrow it's Inverness Cally Thistle against Dundee, and Greenock Morton are at home against Heart of Midlothian. On Wednesday there's a full card. Hamilton Accies, they host Motherwell. It's Hibs at home at Easter Road against Livingston. St Johnstone welcome Rangers, and it's Aberdeen against Celtic. Kilmarnock are at Rugby Park against Dundee United, and Ross County host St Mirren. On Saturday in the Championship, it's Ayr United against Queen of the South, Dundee versus Raith Rovers, Dunfermline against Arbroath, and as we mentioned, Heart of Midlothian against Inverness Cally. Morton also welcome newly relegated Alloa Athletic. It's Scottish Cup action again this weekend, as we've touched on. Aberdeen welcome Dundee United, Hibs play Motherwell, and Kilmarnock are at home against St Mirren, while Rangers welcome St Johnstone to Ibrox. We've went a little bit over time tonight because we've been discussing everything from Tottenham, Manchester United to Stranraer and everything in between. But we'll be discussing it all over again next Monday at the same time, 6:30, for another episode of Play On, the Scottish Football Show. On behalf of myself, David Simmons, Anthony Brown and Stephen Commons, thanks for all your comments and everybody that's been watching, and we'll see you next Monday, same time, same place.